Okay, Mid-Penn Bank Podcast, Season 2, Episode 2, and I guess that's got to make it 32 overall.
That makes it 32 overall, yes.
So where are we as far as how many different countries have we been downloaded in at this point?
Oh, countries is tough. 6 of the 7 continents.
6 of the 7 continents.
Yep.
Which one are we waiting on?
That would be South America. That's still
Really?
the one we can't get a listener in.
Can we get someone to take a vacation down there? And
Why don't know, Connor? Maybe he can take a vacation down
Connor,
there.
get down there and take a vacation in Chile or something.
Sounds good.
And this is our first episode in quite some time. I mean, since the golf outing, and
Yep.
those 5 great episodes, we only had one with Matt Dotz.
Yes. So this is our first one in the new studio.
Yeah. So you can see the new studio behind me. A beautiful wall that they put together, and the logo. It looks great.
Yeah, looks sharp.
Yeah. They don't get to see you, but you're okay with that, right?
I am okay with that. I'm more the guy behind the scenes.
So we do have a guest in for our very first podcast in the revised studio, and they'll pull the screen back. We have Ken Stephon, who's the CEO of William Penn Bank. And, for those of you that follow the Mid-Penn Bank story, a few weeks ago, we announced our intention to merge with William Penn Bank. And William Penn Bank is headquartered in Bucks County, which is an area that we've been in for since 2018 when we merged with First Priority Bank. And so, at that time, we got into that greater Philadelphia metro area market for the first time in our history. And since that time, we've grown very nicely in Chester County and Bucks County and Montgomery County. But this gives us a little bit more, and we'll talk about that as we get to know Ken a little bit. But, the whole reason for us trying to do a little bit more in that market, if you look at the greater Philadelphia metro area, and the way that I define that, it's the western suburbs of Philadelphia, those 3 that I just mentioned, the city of Philadelphia itself, and then across the river in South Jersey, and even in the northern part of Delaware, in the Wilmington area. That's all part of the greater Philadelphia metro area market. And if you look at the demographics of that market, there's 6.5 million people. There are 600,000 businesses. There are dozens of really strong municipalities. And the average income is higher than in central Pennsylvania or anywhere else in Pennsylvania. And so that is a really rich environment for a company like Mid-Penn Bank or William Penn to deliver its products and services, because there's plenty of consumers and businesses and municipalities to consume those. So that's why we're attracted to William Penn Bank. And so, Ken, let's talk a little bit about William Penn Bank as it exists today, and kind of how you guys got to there. So let's start with that. So how long have you been with William Penn Bank, and how long has William Penn Bank been around?
Great. Well, wanted to thank you very much for having me first guest in the new studio.
Yeah,
Appreciate that very much. Thank you. Good to be with you. So I've
And
been
the neon
with
light looks good shining.
the
off
neon
both
light
of
looks
both of
terrific
you.
in here. Everything, all the aesthetics are fantastic. So I've been CEO of William Penn since 2019. My former bank, Audubon Savings Bank in Southern New Jersey, merged into William Penn in the summer of 2018. And I took over as CEO in 2019 after having formerly been the CEO at Audubon Savings.
So Audubon Savings and William Penn, what type of company was William Penn prior to? Was it also a savings or a mutual?
Yeah, small 3-office community bank with about $300 million in assets. Audubon was similarly sized, about $175 million in assets, a mutual savings bank. And without getting into all the regulatory details, mutuals can only merge with other mutuals. So it's not like the whole universe of financial services companies is available. So the 2 mutuals got together, and it was a terrific combination. It created now a 6-office bank in the Lehigh Valley across 2 states. And it really increased our ability to have higher lending limits and also to broaden, obviously, our marketplace. And, we understood that the the management team of William Penn was going to be retiring. And so, the combined company, I took over, like I said, in early 2019. And then subsequent to that date, we combined with two other mutuals, one in Bucks County called Fidelity Savings, and one in Northeast Philadelphia called Washington Savings Bank.
So what's the difference, the fundamental difference between like a publicly traded commercial bank like Mid-Penn and what you're calling either a savings or a mutual savings, or sometimes hear the words thrift? So like, what's the fundamental differences between them?
So all commercial banks are stock banks, and many of the thrift institutions across the country are still in the mutual form of ownership, which is technically owned by the depositor base, or the rights to the retained earnings of the company belong to the depositor base. And so many institutions, many thrift institutions in many recent decades have converted to the stock form of ownership to raise additional capital and to become more commercial bank-like. And so that was essentially the path that we set for ourselves. William Penn Bank was a mutual holding company, which means they were partially converted into the public form of ownership, and Audubon was 100% mutual. So two companies of that ilk can combine, and that's what we did. And the Fidelity and Washington were also mutual thrifts. So we were able to really build a good pot of capital to support the future growth of the organizations. And that led to a full conversion and becoming a fully public company and converting the new combined company into something that was more commercial bank-like.
So operating as a mutual or a thrift, I guess your ability to grow that quickly was a little bit challenged because you need capital to grow, and the only capital that you could get at that point is retained earnings, right?
Exactly right. So whatever your rate of earnings is for the year, essentially you can grow the company by that much in the subsequent year, in its most basic form, right? So the only way you're going to grow faster than that is to bring in capital in some other form other than retained earnings. So if you want to be a growth company, you certainly can't just rely on that going forward. If you have an abundance of capital, you can accelerate that a little bit, but there's no way you can continue to do that over a long horizon.
So you pull basically the four mutuals or thrifts together in 2018?
The first one was 2018, and the second two were on the same day in 2020.
2020, okay.
Yeah.
And then what do you do after that? So now you've got these four pulled together. They're all under the William Penn flag. And William Penn's been around
since 1870.
1870. Sounds familiar. Mid-Penn Bank's been around since 1868. So
there you go.
We're your older brother.
Right. Yeah.
Slightly older brother.
Yeah, we look younger.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So what do you do then after you have these four companies pulled together under one name?
Well, it's not just the forms of ownership that have historically been very different. It's kind of the business model as well. And savings banks were they were kind of born out of the need to create an avenue of home ownership for Americans. And so most traditional thrifts operated as
like
residential 1 to 4, like a Bailey building loan, right?
Yeah, or a building, yeah.
So they were residential 1 to 4 lenders that took in deposits many times in the form of certificates of deposit, time deposits, and then lent that out to local residents. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's not really the commercial bank model. So when you bring four traditional thrift institutions together, there's a kind of a metamorphosis that's necessary to turn that more into a commercial bank model. And so we undertook that process. We brought in some experienced commercial bankers to help us with the process, and kind of restructured the balance sheet and set about on a different course of action. Right, so right after we completed the two mergers in 2020, we started to think about the possibility of going public. And of course, that was in the throes of the pandemic. And so the markets were a little uncertain. But there was a company up in Massachusetts, a large thrift that was one of, if not the largest mutual thrifts in the country. And they converted in the fall of 2020. Mm-hmm. And we watched that with great interest, and it was enormously successful. And so kind of told us that the market was ready, for action as far as that goes. And so we set about doing the conversion. And it's probably about a 6-month process, and we completed it in March of 2021. We raised 126.5 million, added to our existing capital, took us over $200 million in shareholders' equity.
Wow.
And so we ended up with a capital ratio that was in the low 20% range. And for those that don't know what the regulatory restrictions are, well capitalized is 8% or above, and we had nearly 3 times that.
Right.
So we needed to, kind of deploy the capital in a way that would lever up the balance sheet and create rewards for our shareholders as well as our customers.
So how do you go about doing it? You hire some lenders and you go out and make bigger commercial loans, but then you get into 2022,
Right.
and the interest rates go
Very
all
much
the wrong
against the
way.
industry.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, when you get that much cash infused at one time and you need to deploy it, it's impossible to safely deploy it.
Mhm.
Like, you could do it, but you wouldn't really want to live with the result
to do it
later on,
overnight,
right? Yeah. So,
I think there were banks like Silicon Valley Bank.
there's a few that
Yeah.
that have become very notorious
Yeah.
for doing it the wrong way. So, but we did. We brought in some experienced lenders, and we did it through a combination of organic growth, levering up the balance sheet, but we also, after a 1-year regulatory moratorium against buying back your own shares, we started a share buyback program, and we were very successful with that. The market was very cooperative in that we were able to buy back our shares at less than their tangible book value, and when you do that, you accrete very significant value to your shareholders.
Mhm.
So it doesn't kind of soften the safety and soundness of the institution, because we still had, again, 3 times the amount that we needed to operate safely. So you're rewarding kind of all your constituents by
Mhm.
by engaging in that kind of program, and it worked very, very well for us. And but the rate environment being what it was, it was difficult to kind of make that transformation through the teeth of that, overall rate environment.
Yeah,
So,
because you're primarily a spread business institution, right?
That's right.
And so what that means is, you made most of your money off of getting deposits and lending those deposits
Exactly.
out and making a spread on the difference.
That's right.
And when that yield curve got inverted,
Right.
where short-term rates were higher than longer-term rates,
Right.
it made
Worst
it
scenario
tough for
possible.
everyone. Everyone had a net interest margin compression, and you guys certainly had your share.
Right. And a small bank like ours typically does not have a seasoned program whereby you bring in non-interest income.
Mhm. Right.
Your bank does, and it's a great thing. Ours does not, and it's very difficult to start that on a de novo basis because the costs typically outrun the revenue stream for a long period of time.
Yep. They
And
do.
so, even though you recognize that that will be a great source of revenue going forward, it's very difficult to gain the scale that's necessary
Absolutely.
in order to operate effectively. that
Right.
way.
So let's go back to Ken though. So
Okay.
that's the kind of the more recent story of William Penn. But when did you get into this business, and why did you get into this business?
Yeah.
I think one of these days I'm going to end up telling my story on this thing, right, Scott? Someone wants to interview me
I think in our next episode.
in our next episode.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Dave Latour, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So how did you get into banking?
Well, I kind of fell into it fortuitously because in high school I took an accounting course, and my teacher took a liking to me because of my accounting aptitude. And there was a part-time opening in the bookkeeping department of the local community bank. It was called Yardville National Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And she recommended me for that job. Shout out to Mrs. Barenfeld, 1977. And so that's the way I got into banking in the first place. And I worked my way through college, working part-time at Yardville National Bank.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, I worked in a couple different savings banks in my home county, Mercer County, New Jersey, while I was going to grad school. And eventually I ended up at a small bank in South Jersey called Clover, Federal Savings and Loan. And I got my first CEO job at the age of 34 at Clover. And it was great exposure because it really taught me to look at the business from every possible angle, learn a lot about what not to do to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so since 1977, I've been in the business. So it feels like...
So some of those steps, Yardville.
Right.
It was Yardville National Bank.
That's right. It's now
And-
part of PNC.
It's part of PNC.
Yes.
When did it become part of PNC, or how did it become part of PNC?
I'd say somewhere in the early 90s, mid 90s. The bank, was not dissimilar from the William Penn story, which is local community bank, difficulty operating with lack of scale. PNC wanted into the market and found a good prospective target in Yardville, and so they sold the company. So that's been happening obviously in our industry for decades, and that's an early example of what transpired in terms of larger banks moving into good markets by buying smaller targets.
And what about Clover?
Clover ultimately became. I left Clover voluntarily to found a new bank called Village Bank, and Village Bank was raising capital at the time that the market turned very sour, and we were not able to get sufficient capital to get the bank off the ground. Clover eventually became part of Beneficial, and now part of WSFS.
Mm-hmm. WSFS.
That's right.
I just saw Roger Levinson the other day.
Did you? Yeah.
Interesting guy.
Yeah.
We were both at that bank conference down in Florida.
Good. Yeah.
That I did the No Shave November video. So if you haven't seen that yet, you can get on social media and see our No Shave November update with me and a T-shirt and a baseball cap, which is embarrassing. So from Clover, you tried the Village thing. What time period was that?
That was around 2000.
Okay, and that's tough time.
Tough time.
In the market.
Yeah.
Where do you go after that?
I was one of the original members of another startup bank called Hyperion Bank in Philadelphia.
Charlie's Bank, right?
Charlie's Bank. Charlie came in much later. Charlie, I guess, is probably the second or third CEO of the company.
Oh, really? Okay.
Joe Matisoff, who was a lender for a number of local financial institutions, and he and an investment group were the founders, and they needed an experienced banker to kind of run the operational and financial aspects of it through the de novo process. So they recruited me in to do that. Again, in that kind of process, you learn a lot of different back office type things to help you in the future. And so we got the bank off the ground, and eventually I went to a place that's now called Penn Community Bank.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it was the first savings bank of Percy, and it was a larger institution. So I had about 100 reports. So it was my first real expansion of my managerial responsibilities. I was CFO there and made some balance sheet transformations to kind of help the revenue stream going forward. And so it's been an interesting ride. And eventually I ended up at Audubon Savings Bank in 2013.
So do you have you kind of fortuitously, I always say accidentally, I accidentally found my way into this business. And, over time you get the things that really make you want to stay in this business.
Right.
And, I've always thought that, I always have thought there's a great deal of nobility in being a banker because you're helping people, buy a home, maybe their first home or a vacation property, or put a child through college, or start a business, or sell a business, or buy a business, or, save for retirement. I mean, there's a bunch of different things that we do to help a variety of different types of customers achieve their goals, which I think there's some nobility in that. But along the way, I became like an anti-credit union guy.
Right.
That's been my kind of the driving force behind, in addition to trying to build a financial institution that could serve customers, throughout this Northeast area. I've always been a well, I don't want to, I don't want to do anything like that because
Right.
did you ever get anything like that in your, like, were you an anti-credit union guy, or is there some other aspect of the business that you said, in addition to the nobility of doing that, there's also this part that really energizes me?
Well, I think the nobility aspect, I think, is a very important one that you've talked about. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but there had to be some point in my career where I realized that I was not preparing to be the shortstop for the Mets or the point guard for the Knicks, and
Hmm.
realized that maybe I should really concentrate on the banking career path. So, uh, when you realize that despite banks get vilified a lot in the press and kind of have a reputation
All
of
banks.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's sad because a lot of us don't do the kind of things that maybe have developed that reputation for the industry over the years. But the bottom line there is that when you realize that you can be instrumental in serving the community, serving a variety of constituents, including your employees, your shareholders, the community at large. It all comes together, and again, it really does. It's very rewarding over the long haul to be able to make that contribution. It's sort of a societal contribution,
Hmm.
and we don't really get credit or really that much seek the credit for doing that. But it's an industry that I feel like the economy clearly can't do without, the country can't do without, and has made a huge contribution to the overall success of countless individuals, countless of Americans over the years. So yeah,
But you were running a company during the Great Recession.
yep,
I just started running the company in the middle part of the Great Recession, and I remember at that time, some politician, won't say who, used the terminology "fat cat bankers,"
Mhm.
and what they really meant were those like Wall Street guys, right?
Yeah.
The people that created the subprime stuff
Right,
that ultimately toppled the entire economy. And I remember thinking, well, geez, because when you say fat cat bankers, the person walking around on the street, they think that means every banker,
right,
like me. And I'm like, I'm not a fat cat banker. Like, that was a difficult thing to
yeah,
go through at the time because, I think that community banks, mutual thrifts, like, we're doing a lot of really good stuff for the
right,
community,
right.
for the borrowing community, for the depositing community, for the investing community, and then to have that all wiped away by lumping everyone into banker category.
Yeah,
And in previous generations, it was the banker's hours. Like, I never understood that.
Yeah.
When I got out of college and I first got into banking, I was working whatever 70 to 100 hours a week.
right,
And I
right.
remember all my friends used to say, "But you guys have banker's hours." I never got what that meant, but
Yeah,
I think it's that painting an industry with the same broad brush,
right,
because there couldn't be more of a difference between a company like Chase or PNC or Wells Fargo and Mid-Penn Bank or William Penn, right?
Right.
Like, we're both banks, we're both financial institutions, but that's about where it stops,
that's right.
right? The way that we handle our customers and handle our communities and the things that we do, and we get paid for it. I mean, it's what we're in business for. But I just think that those statements like "fat cat banker"
Yeah.
or "banker's hours" is just unfair.
Yeah, I think so too. It's there's a tendency to kind of compartmentalize all kinds of different professions into and then find catchphrases that people can not relate to, but kind of latch on to and throw around. But I was the same as you. It's not uncommon to work 70, 80 hours a week, and
Mhm.
and you wonder where these kind of these things come from. But and people don't realize how much you really sweat over the financial well-being of the people that do bank with you, and all the little ways that you try to find ways to make their financial lives better. And because you learn more and more over the years, not to disparage anybody in any way, shape, or form. Everybody's got their different things that they're
Sure.
good at, but a lot of people don't really understand how to take care of their own finances, and they need a helping hand, and that's what your community banks really are there for. And you spend a lot of time educating people or helping people or giving people guidance, and you really do get invested in their financial well-being.
I'm sure you guys do financial literacy in your footprint.
Sure.
So do we. Obviously, our footprint is, getting bigger. We're doing financial literacy classes out in Western Pennsylvania, up in the northern part of Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
here in Central Pennsylvania, now in the Southeast area, and even over in New Jersey. And, that's becoming so well received.
Right.
And we're getting so many requests. We're actually thinking about, instead of just having, some of our employees, we're going to get like one person whose job it is to go out and conduct those financial literacy classes, because there's a lot of people that, it's not a given. Like, people, unless you were taught it somewhere along the line, maybe you don't, not only you don't budget, but you don't even know how to, balance your checkbook.
Right.
Like, I balance my checkbook once or twice a week.
Yeah.
Now with online banking, and I think that's when I graduated from college, the only thing I knew about a bank was that there were these people called tellers.
Yeah.
And you went and gave them your money, and they put it in an account, and they stamped your passbook. And there's so much more to this industry,
Right.
and so much more that we can do for people, including educating them on financial matters. And again, I think that's part of the benefit of being a community bank.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the greater Philadelphia metro area.
Mm-hmm.
You heard my lead-in comments. Why did you, when you have a company like William Penn and you're operating in that really great market, and you've had a successful 150 plus year
Right.
track history, why us? Like, why did you and the board decide to partner up with Mid-Penn Bank
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to and you don't have to go through any details, but, why us?
Well, I think broadly, not just the William Penn, Mid-Penn story, but I think our industry as a whole has been in a decades-long realization period that size and scale are increasingly important, and that number continues to get bigger, right? So with regulatory burdens being what they are, we've got, for example, a team of employees that 15 years ago you didn't have on your
There's
staff.
people like
right?
BSA, AML,
All kinds of compliance-related
risk.
issues.
Yeah.
That's right. And as you know, but maybe the audience doesn't know, a lot of things start out being targeted at the much larger institutions, and maybe the rules are even written specifically for the larger banks.
Mm-hmm.
But it gradually morphs into a best practice, which then the regulatory environment imposes on you. So, eventually these things filter down to, we're a sub $1 billion bank, and, we still have the same type of demands and burdens on us that much larger institutions have. So that's a huge factor. So we've gradually come to realize over the years that at some point in time, it might be necessary for us to find a partner that we could share that burden with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as in recent years, with the compression of the margins, as you alluded to earlier, one thing that we really wanted to do was we wanted to have the cleanest and best positioned bank in our area, because we thought that, not only for our own safety and soundness and that of our customers, but if we were to find a partner that you want to deliver something that's not going to be burdensome to the combined entity. You want to be able to find synergy on day one. So for us, that was all about a very clean balance sheet, pristine asset quality in the loan portfolio, and being well positioned in with, frankly, scarcity value in a really highly desirable geographic marketplace. So over the last few years, we've opened new offices in Doylestown, which is the county seat of Bucks
Beautiful.
County. We were in Richboro. The legacy William Penn was in Richboro for many, many years. We opened up in Yardley, Bucks County. We opened up in Hamilton Township, Mercer County, across the river. markets that are really vibrant and sound and really growth areas where you not only serve the existing deposit base and lending base, but there's a wealth of opportunity for growth. And so, to your credit and MidPenn's credit, you recognize the ability to take this to a much larger scale than what we can do independently. It accelerates our growth tremendously compared to what we could accomplish on our own, from growing our capital by 600% or so to growing the balance sheet by 600 or 700%, and really positioning us to be a very strong force in community banking in Eastern Pennsylvania.
And do you feel that the cultures of MidPenn Bank and William Penn, I mean, obviously we're, different sizes.
Right.
We have, slightly different roots. We have certainly different geographic roots, but even different roots in that, one was a, mutual companies and one was a commercial bank. Do you think that other than those differences, the cultural fit, do you feel that it's going to be, symbiotic or difficult?
It was one of the most important factors, frankly, in our consideration, because we wanted to, again, be part of the partnership going forward. And, it's all public information. We're not selling the bank per se. It's an all-stock deal, which means that our shareholders become shareholders of MidPenn, and it's a combined company going forward.
That's why we call it a merger, not
exactly
an acquisition.
Right. It's not an acquisition, it's a merger. And so from this day forward, our interests are perfectly aligned. So it was important for us to find a partner who really shared our values, shared our philosophical approach to community banking, and shared a vision for the future. And to me, that was one of the most important factors. You and I had a lot of preliminary conversations about where we thought the industry was going, where we thought our respective banks were going. And I think we discovered that we shared a very common vision about where this combined entity should go.
Then you and I met a couple years ago.
Yep.
Probably had 5 or 6 meetings, but maybe a couple more
Right.
over that time period. Were they all interviews? Were you interviewing me?
Yeah. Were you interviewing me?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I do feel that, look, so this is the 6th time we've done this. And in the previous 5 times, all those companies were very dissimilar to us, right?
Right.
They were much smaller. They were, maybe obviously in different geographic markets than we were for the most part. They made loans and got deposits and things like that. But, culturally, some of those fits weren't that easy.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a lot easier. We're not dominant in your geography, but we're in your geography.
Yeah.
And so we understand the streets a little bit better. I had an opportunity to come down and meet your employees and tour through all your facilities, and I was really pleasantly surprised.
Mm-hmm. Great.
You have great people, and they have the same types of enthusiastic smiles that I think that you see when you go into a MidPenn bank.
Yeah.
And you've clearly paid a lot of attention to your facilities are clean, both on the inside and the outside, and that's not a given.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of energy trying to make sure that we had the type of people throughout the organization that kind of shared our philosophical approach. And you're very lucky to find those kind of people, as you well know.
Absolutely.
Right? So we've been very lucky over the years to build the team that we have, and thank you for the compliments that you've given them. And they're really excited about the transaction, and we're all excited about where this can go.
And I'd love hearing that, because obviously, anytime there's a merger or an acquisition, there's angst.
Right.
From both sides, by the way. That's not always
of course.
from the smaller company. Sometimes it's, the bigger company too. And that's why it's really important for me to come out there and try to, help calm everyone down.
Right.
I really enjoyed those couple of days. So
as did they.
So where do you see our greatest potential? I mean, obviously you have a great presence in Bucks County. And Bucks County is a spectacular county, one of the best in Pennsylvania, great demographics. But you also have a presence in the city. We don't at all. So we had one location in Bucks County. We don't have any locations in the city. We have 3 locations over in central New Jersey.
Right.
You have 1.
Right.
And we don't have any locations in South Jersey where you have 3. Now
That's
we announced, at or around the same time that we were opening up an office in Camden,
Right.
which would be considered South Jersey, but you have 3 existing, and they're in great areas,
Yeah.
like Mount Laurel, Cherry Hill type of area. They're spectacular areas. So where do you see our greatest potential for growth over the next, after we get the deal done and
Right.
over the next 5 years?
Well, one thing we've experienced in previous mergers that I think will really prevail once again here is that the larger the company becomes, the broader your ability to draw additional talent, the more of a talent magnet the organization becomes. So the talented bankers in our respective markets will have a greater interest in being part of what we are together. Not only the great teams that we bring now, but those teams have a greater propensity to expand once you get into a larger company like this. There are opportunities sometimes that we have to leave on the table because of our lack of scale. Loan-to-one borrower limitations, again, without getting into enormous amount of detail about regulations, but the bigger the banks become, the broader your lending market becomes. So there are some times that we have to leave opportunities on the table that now we can bring into the combined organization, and that only continues to build upon itself over time. And so because of the demographics of the markets that you discussed and everything else, I think there's a wealth of opportunity for us to grow organically through our own internal expansion. But not only that, but over time, as the operating environment remains difficult for smaller banks, that we would be a safe set of hands for other companies to combine with us in a way that we would be able to help them serve their communities and their customer bases as well. So I think there's a dual opportunity for us.
You've kind of talked about consolidation in this industry. So when I got to Penn, which was February of 2009, so I'm coming up on my 16th year, or the end of my 16th year. At that time, there were, I think, 212 banks still headquartered in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include like PNC or, because they're headquartered, I think, in Delaware or whatever. So that's not the number of banks that are operating in Pennsylvania. That's just the number of banks that were headquartered in Pennsylvania. And now, I don't know that I know the exact number, but I think it's a little over 100.
Yeah.
So in the last 16 years, 100 of those companies have been consolidated, or merged with some other company. And I'm guessing that if you look 16 years from now, that 100 and some will be 50 or maybe even less.
Maybe even less.
And every time you see one of those, so when I first got here, the legal lending limit of the company was $3.5 million. Now our legal lending limit is $80 million.
Right.
And so you can do a lot more, which may not have been important at that time in central Pennsylvania, but in the greater Philadelphia metro area where the dollars are just bigger.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to, get involved in real C&I lending, middle market lending, even commercial real estate lending, you've got to be able to, have the capital muscle to do something.
Exactly
like that.
right.
And so I think once we get this deal completed, our market capitalization is in the neighborhood of $700 and some million.
That's right.
If everything, stocks stay where they are.
Right.
So, that gives us an ability to do a lot. And that's what excites me about this. And I don't think that we could have picked a better partner.
Thank you.
To
We feel the
expand
same way.
To expand our presence in that really beautiful market. And, what we've done here in central Pennsylvania, 16 years ago, we were not a factor in central Pennsylvania. Now we are. Arguably, in my opinion, the best bank in central Pennsylvania. And, now we're trying to do that same thing down in that greater Philadelphia metro area. And again, we got our start with First Priority. And that was a really well-run bank.
Right.
But now we're doing a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you're right. We're going to be able to attract, more customers. We're going to be able to attract more employees. We're going to be able to attract more shareholders. This is a really good thing, I think, for the future of the company, which you guys are now going to be, 18% of.
Right.
So
Yeah, we very much feel the same way. And, one of the tricks of this whole thing is to be able to achieve these things without losing the community bank feel. And that's not easily accomplished. But again, we wouldn't be part of this if we didn't have the confidence that the way you've grown the company thus far and having us combine, that we can maintain that community feel while being large enough to be able to accommodate almost any kind of business that we like.
And Ken, that's the real pay dirt, right? Because I hear it all the time. People that say, "Man, you still do this now that you're this much bigger?" Because we're 10 times bigger than we were when I got here.
Yeah.
And people were like, "You still go on, 2 tours of all your employees every year? Or you still have a breakfast with employees every month? Or you still attend orientation sessions? Or you still do this? Or you still do that?" And I'm like, I'm never stop doing that stuff because that's what a community bank is. Even though we're a larger community bank now, we're still a community bank.
Right.
And community banks still have to do things differently than those big companies.
Right.
And as long as I'm here, even if it might make my job, tremendously more difficult, we'll always do it that way.
Yeah.
So, my friend, I'm really looking forward to, navigating through the next few months.
Same here.
Through the regulatory applications and which includes the SEC and getting both shareholder groups to agree to it.
Right.
And, hopefully we'll find ourselves sometime in April being business partners on, the rest of the path, which I think is going to be incredible. And, you've agreed to work at 10, 15 more years?
8. Yeah.
But we're going to have a lot of fun together.
Absolutely.
And,
We're looking
certainly
forward
a little more work to do to get this thing
Right.
across the finish line,
Right.
but I'm really looking forward to it. And
Same here.
thanks for coming in today
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
and introducing yourself to the crowd. And Scott, we're going to be back in a couple weeks.
That's correct, yes.
Where we're going to have Dave Latour, who, for those of you who know Dave, he runs a nice communications company, public relations firm. Also has a podcast that he's on episode like 400. He does his weekly, I think.
It's a commitment to do that. And he's a previous guest who'll be making a
He's a
return.
previous guest, and I've been on his show a couple of times. And so I got a lot of feedback from listeners saying, you always bring in these guests and they tell you their story and, you do a really good job interviewing. Why don't you tell your story? And I'm like, no one wants to hear my story. But I think that that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to invite Latour to come here and give us an update on all the things that he does, but kind of flip the script a little bit and let him, interview me and see what he can get out of me to tell my story. So I don't think it'll be interesting, but
It's definitely a must-listen episode.
I think they all are.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Everyone have a great week, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Thank you for listening to the Mid-Penn Bank podcast. If you like what you've heard, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. The podcast can be found at Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever you find great podcasts. If you have any feedback or questions, email us at podcast@midpennbank.com. References in this podcast to MidPenn are to MidPenn Bancorp, Inc. and its subsidiaries and affiliates. This podcast expresses the views of its participants and may not represent the views of MidPenn or its officers and employees. In addition, these views are subject to change without notice, and MidPenn has no duty or obligation to update the information contained in this podcast. This podcast is being made available for informational purposes only and should not be used for any other purposes. You are encouraged to consult with competent legal, tax, accounting, or investment professionals before engaging in any financial transaction. MidPenn does not make any warranties as to the accuracy or completeness of the information in this podcast, does not endorse any third-party companies, products, or services, and assumes no liability for your use of this information. Forward-looking statements should not be considered guarantees or predictions of future events. This podcast is the sole property of MidPenn and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in whole or in part in any form without prior written consent of MidPenn.